A lot of people believe that the Empire lost the Galactic Civil War at the Battle of Jakku or at the Battle of Endor. I simply see these as milestones in the Empire's gradual slide towards chaos and ruin. That's because the Galactic Civil War was not a traditional conflict. It was a revolution, or awakening of the people, if you will. This was not a conflict between two conventional forces, it was between a military force and the people that military was supposed to protect. And the leader of the rebellion, Mon Mothma, was wise enough to understand that victory against the Empire couldn't be achieved solely through military confrontation. Instead, she wanted the rebellion to fight for the hearts and minds of the people. Because every Imperial trooper or pilot that defected not only adds more manpower to the Rebel Alliance, it also decreases the strength of the Empire. And the more cruel and chaotic the Empire became, the more Emperor Palpatine's true nature was revealed to the rest of the galaxy, the more the Empire crumbled, the more the people left. Every massacre, every orbital bombardment carried out by Imperial forces created even more enemies and rebels. Now, the only people who seemed to understand this problem the Empire was facing was the members of the ISB, or Imperial Security Bureau. This was a civilian intelligence gathering organization that was entrusted with preserving Palpatine's order. As the rebellion grew and conventional Imperial forces struggled to contain this massive movement, it was individuals like Major Partagaz of the ISB who were placed in charge of the Empire's anti-insurgency strategy because, honestly, only the ISB understood the true nature of the threat they faced.
We are healthcare providers. We treat sickness. We identify symptoms. We locate germs, whether they arise from within or have come from the outside. The longer we wait to identify a disorder, the harder it is to treat the disease.
I mean, Partagaz gets it. Like, ideas, they can grow like viruses, like diseases. Popular rebellions always heavily rely on this snowball effect. And because the Empire was heavily punitive and also completely out of touch with the struggles of the average citizen of the Empire, all the rebellion really needed to do to win was to occasionally strike out against the Empire, show people it had a chance of winning, and more importantly, just survive. And so for me, the Galactic Empire lost the Galactic Civil War pretty early on in the conflict when they failed to stop the early rebellion from growing into something larger and more legitimate. This is before the Alliance to restore the Republic had coalesced into one unified force, and at the time you had dozens of different rebel movements with a dozen different reasons why they wanted to fight the Empire, and very few commonalities. I mean, before the Battle of Scarif, the idea of these various factions coming together and then following the command of one leader, well, that seemed very, very far-fetched. But after Scarif, the rebellion developed a common central identity. The individual faction leaders took a step back, and for the first time, we saw an actual rebel alliance. And this rebel alliance began to rapidly grow in every direction, like a disease, as Major Partagaz had mentioned. Which is why the Empire's last chance of stopping the rebellion was on that beautiful tropical island world of Scarif. And so what kept the rebellion alive? Well, it was mostly the Rebel Navy's doctrine and how it selected all of its ships from Snub Fighter to Mon Calamari cruiser and how it used these ships. Every Rebel ship, big or small, was equipped with the state-of-the-art hyperdrive and also able to function independently from a larger carrier group for an extended period of time. The T-65B X-Wing was not a cheap starfighter, but it was flexible and very well-rounded. One could say the same thing for the RZ-1A Wing and the BTL-Y Wing. Even the CR-90 Corvettes that were so popular amongst Rebel forces were technically designed to run blockades. And so what you have is a small and heavily armed fleet that is capable of carrying out hit-and-run attacks on heavily fortified targets and convoys, and then is capable of dipping immediately back into hyperspace, which means that the Empire's massive navy was always too slow to bring its entire might and firepower against the rebellion, which must have been really frustrating. There's always been one solution to this huge problem the Empire faces, and that is the interdiction vessel. These are ships that have large gravity well projectors that emit an interdiction field which can prevent starships nearby from going into hyperspace and escaping, and at the same time pull out nearby starships in hyperspace into real space. With enough interdictors in your fleet, you can completely control the traffic in hyperspace lane or who comes in and out of a system. This is a really useful tactical weapon that could actually have larger impacts at the strategic level. If the Empire was more flexible when it came to doctrine, the interdictor could have fundamentally changed how the Imperial Navy operated. But unfortunately, that's not what happened. The interdictor vessel was developed underneath the watchful eye of Wilhuff Tarkin in a special weapons division. As we all know, Tarkin has a liking for bigger and flashier projects like the Death Star program, rather than more functional and practical projects that actually have a chance of working properly and benefiting the Empire. And so for a variety of reasons, interdictors were never produced en masse or a central part of the Imperial Navy's doctrine, which is why a lot of people just viewed it as a gimmick ship, which it most definitely is not. But then in 2 BBY, Grand Admiral Thrawn's 7th Fleet would use 2 Interdictor Class Star Destroyers and almost fundamentally changed how space battles would be fought in this war. You see, Thrawn had tracked down the local Lothal sector rebel cell to the planet of Atollon. At the time, Asasi Group, one of the largest rebel cells, was also visiting the planet, providing a huge target for Thrawn to trap and destroy. When the 7th Fleet appeared over the planet, the rebels carried out a hasty evacuation, like the ones they had already done several times during the Lothal campaign and would do in the future during the Battle of Hoth and at the end of the Battle of Scarif. But this time around, the first rebel ship to enter hyperspace, a Nebulon B escort frigate, was immediately pulled out of hyperspace. Disoriented, it would be quickly destroyed by several batteries of turbolasers. I mean, this was a terrifying experience for the rebel fleet once they realized that there was no outrunning this blockade. They were completely trapped. Now, had Admiral Cassius Constantine not been chasing glory and promotion, the Empire would have completely decimated the rebel forces on the planet. Instead, Admiral Constantine was in charge of one of the Interdictor destroyers, got bored, and decided to pull his ship into danger's way, allowing Rebel Commander Jun Sato to kamikaze the Interdictor with his own carrier ship. Regardless of this huge mess-up, the rebellion ended up with a Pyrrhic victory. They suffered massive, tremendous losses, but they were able to escape with most of their important personnel intact. But still, the rebellion had lost a considerable amount of ships and war material trying to escape the interdiction blockade. I mean, any battle where the Empire is able to trade losses with the rebellion 1-to-1 is a huge victory for the regime. And the rebellion really could not afford to take too many more L's that were as devastating as this one. Now, ultimately, this was a huge loss. I would say it was irreversible in many ways for the Empire, and that was because the Interdictor failed. Not because the technology was bad, or the hardware was bad, or the software was bad. It wasn't even Admiral Thrawn's fault, really. Instead, all the blame can be placed on Admiral Constantine, who's just a vainglorious moron. His actions and death would really harm the image of the Interdictor, and less creative and open-minded commanders all across the Imperial Navy suddenly saw the Interdictor as a very fragile ship and a liability. I mean, yes, an Interdictor's gravity wells are a huge liability for the ship itself. If compromised, the entire vessel could be destroyed, but Interdictors can be stationed far away from the fighting and still project their fields. They were a completely viable tactical tool that was just thrown aside because Thrawn didn't have the same type of political clout that, say, Tarkin had. Now, interdiction technology is not all that new. I mean, they've been around forever. During the Old Republic, you have the Leviathan Interdictor Class Cruiser, which was used by the Old Republic and also Revan, and the Empire had the 418 Immobilizer Cruiser, which was like the predecessor of the Interdictor Class Star Destroyer. This was a smaller version of the larger wedge-shaped Interdictor, and it was also pretty vulnerable to enemy fire. The Interdictor Class Star Destroyer was around 1,129 meters in length, almost a third shorter than your typical ISD, and the ship only had around 20 quad laser cannons and a small complement of fighters on board. And this was because the gravity well generators took a lot of energy, and so you couldn't have too many weapons, emplacements, or systems on board. But this is actually completely fine. I mean, an Interdictor Class Star Destroyer is really a support ship. It should be in the back line, it should be protected and far away from the fighting. It really shouldn't be getting targeted that much in the first place. And while the ship was definitely very expensive, one only has to look at the moon-sized Death Star to understand just how limitless the Imperial's black budget for military spending was. I mean, at the Battle of Atollon, the Interdictor almost won the entire Galactic Civil War. And let's say the Empire used the ship during the escape of Mon Mothma from the core, it's very likely that the former senator would have never made it to the rebellion and become its leader. At the Battle of Hoth, the Empire could have kept all rebel forces pinned down in the system. At the Battle of Scarif, the Empire could have prevented those plans from ever reaching off-world, which means the Battle of Yavin might have never even occurred. The Interdictor Class Star Destroyer is definitely one of the most underrated ships in all of Star Wars lore. Although it does make sense because Thrawn liked this technology, and everything Thrawn did, from studying the culture of his enemies to respecting his enemies to developing a higher quality TIE fighter, are a part of his superior, albeit unorthodox strategies. Thrawn always had the right idea. The only problem is he had blue skin and red eyes, and let's be honest, a lot of Imperials did not trust aliens like him. So let me know in the comment section below what you guys think. Could this ship have saved the Empire? I certainly think so. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy,